Okay, there you see what I've chosen, the fundamental processes involved in triangles. Next slide, please. The intro. A favorite quote of mine, which I wanted to get into my last book, but I couldn't get a response from the publisher that allowed me to do it. It's a Rudyard Kipling poem, I think, first stanza, that he wrote this in 1920s, I believe. Father, mother, and me, sister and auntie say, all people like us are we, and everyone else is they. And they live over the sea, while we live over the way. But would you believe it? They look upon us, we, as only a sort of they. Next one, please. So just to emphasize this groupiness and how triangles fit in to, or understanding that groupiness is a step toward understanding the triangle concept in Bowen theory. Next one, please. And very important things happen in this mother-child relationship. I don't have to sell that point of view to anybody. To quote Murray Bowen, we live our lives in networks of emotional forces that follow triangle patterns. I actually have a plaque on my wall given to me by someone in Washington when I was down there. And it has this quote of Bowen's. And this is a main artist, Jamie Wyeth. He called this envy. And when I looked at this painting, well, the way I interpreted it is that two of these seagulls are involved with each other, and the one below is the outsider. And he chose envy for the envy, to the desire to be one of the insiders. So within the family emotional system, the emotional tensions shift about in an orderly series of emotional alliances and rejections. Triangles are the molecules of an emotional system. That's one of my favorite quotes from Bowen, the molecules of an emotional system. A two-person system is inherently unstable. Another Bowen quote. What makes a two-person system unstable? Human beings have an intense need for emotional closeness, but are also allergic to too much of it. Another Bowen quote, of course. Next one. So now I'm going to talk triangle basics before going on to some other things about the triangle. So this illustrates a triangle in a state of relative calm. The blue square and the blue circle represent the inside positions, and down below, the red circle emphasizes the outside position, but the triangle is in a state of relative calm. Next one, please. The outsider predictably makes moves to form an alliance with one of the insiders. The stability and calmness of the insiders depends on exclusion of the outsider. I think that's an extraordinarily important insight. And so this is a dynamic equilibrium. A triangle is in a state of dynamic equilibrium. So now the triangle is moving into a tension state. And now the two insiders are both quite anxious and feeling the pain of that. And the outsider is actually now in a better position. So both insiders make efforts to involve the third in their tension-producing process, their conflict. So you see the arrows down at the outsider. So one former insider becomes the new uncomfortable outsider, at least for a time, and that could be, say, a father in a family. And now mother and child are the inside positions. So this is very high tension states. Next one. Very red. Go ahead. Okay. The outside position then becomes the most comfortable one. And it's a kind of one of the insiders distances into the outside position to get away from the tension. And then the conflict develops between the former outsider at the bottom and the insider. You see these patterns, and it reminds me that many people think this can all be described by mathematical formulas. And I think they got some kind of a point there. I don't know what the math would look like, but all this predictability, and how could you apply mathematical principles to that? So now the advantage of the outside position is let you and her fight. I'm out now, and I'm calmer. That's the preferred position. And the highly anxious insiders attempt now to involve a fourth person in the process. And this becomes the interlocking triangle idea. Next one. So the highly anxious insiders attempt to involve a fourth person in the process, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the way the process can spread through a family, of course, or a social group. Next one. Note bene. It is impossible to see triangles without shifting from individual cause and effect thinking to systems thinking. This, of course, was Bowen's insight at NIH. Cause and effect thinking assigns the cause of a person's behavior to processes that operate within that person. Next one. Triangles are about people's behavior being regulated by a relationship process that all members contribute to equally. When parents say, yes, we know we are very reactive to our son, but that's because of the way he is acting. Now, that's not systems thinking. That's blaming the triangle on one member. Now, just to review some points about the emotional system, which the triangle is embedded in the emotional system of the human and likely in other animals. To recognize and manage triangles effectively, it is essential to acquire more than an intellectual knowledge of them. The underlying emotional forces and how one participates in the intensification and maintenance of the forces must be grasped fully. Next one. So, of course, who do we turn to when we start talking about evolution is Darwin's second book, The Expression of the Emotions, How Animals and Humans express and signal to others their emotions. And I got a dog lying here on the floor who now is trying to sleep, but some say the dog understands the human feeling process better than any other mammal on earth, even the chimp. So again, a Bowen quote, the emotional system is the force that motivates. That drives the behavior. The relationship system is the way it is expressed. So just to summarize these three systems that Bowen articulated, the emotional system includes instinct, reproduction, the autonomic nervous system, subjective states, forces governing relationship systems in contact with cellular and somatic processes. So this is a bodily operation. The feeling system, aspects of emotional functioning register on the cerebral cortex as feelings. A bridge that is in contact with superficial aspects of the emotional system functioning and with the intellectual system. Feelings thus have a very important role. And the intellectual system, of course, think, reason, and reflect, and that makes possible, within limits, conscious control over automatic reactivity, which of course is part of the process of differentiation of self. Next. Now, this is one of my favorite quotes of all. It's a book I ordered some years ago called Defining the Wind. And it was by Scott Hewler. And here's his quote. There was something about describing the wind that sparked expressive language. And I think the answer is that the wind is invisible. You can't describe it because you can't see it. You can only describe what it does to things that you can see. Sails, the sea, trees, roof tiles. To describe clouds, trees, or anything else, you focus in on that specific thing. To describe the wind, you do the opposite. You look at everything else. It's mind expanding. This, I think, is identical to what family systems theory tries to enable people to do. You can see it in the impact it's having on the various functional levels of the people in the family system and social system. So again, just to emphasize, next one, you're talking about the interactive process that you can't really see, but you can see it, interpret it from the way people in the family system change their functioning. And this is the pride and joy of all, that it's possible to be objective. Emotional objectivity is possible. And that's the key note I think you recognize to differentiation of self. That the ability, following emotional objectivity comes neutrality. Another way to say that is that rather than the situation being viewed as toxic, it can be viewed as interesting. And that is a basis for acting in a new way in relationship to others in the system. Triangle is a big part of this. So man is an evolving form of life, that he is more related to lower forms of life than he is different from them. You know whose quote this is, of course, Murray Bowen, that most psychological theories focus on the uniqueness of man rather than his relatedness to the biological world. And that the instinctual forces that govern all animal and protoplasmic behavior are more basic in human behavior than most theories recognize. Guess who? Next one. So I'm just going to touch on the NIMH study project because that's where all these ideas began to spring up in Bowen's mind in that short period between 1954 and 59. And of course, the study, among other things, produced a new theory of human development. Next one. So this is an effort to summarize some of the key things that came out of NIMH, and all these blue arrows back and forth are, depicting or symbolizing the way people are behaving in relation to one another and the need for the other, seeing that in NIMH, allergy to too much closeness to the other, which I mentioned earlier, loss of each other equals death, reciprocity, emotional programming, under functioning, closeness distance cycles, anxiety transfer, and conflict. And that you die or I die can be on a continuum from manageable to somebody dies. So that's one that I want to summarize in IMH and those extraordinary discoveries that were made there, and triangles were first seen there. Next one. The emotional interdependence is so great that disturbances in the relationship profoundly threaten one's survival. And I've mentioned at other presentations through the years that that's how I think what drove my brother's suicide. Now, back in 1969, long time ago now, but there was the threat to the interdependence. Next one, please. So it's on a continuum from manageable to you die or I die. So here, I just think it might be of use to take some of these various terms we use in Bowen theory. And I believe these are all fundamentally equivalent terms, all getting at the same thing. Unresolved symbiotic attachment, unresolved emotional attachment, emotional fusion, functional interdependence, and undifferentiation. They're all describing the same fundamental process. And of course, below is the continuum of the degrees of these things. On the left side, people with porous emotional boundaries and sort of on top of each other in the drawings. And on the right side, people who are better defined. And that became the basis of what he first called the scale of differentiation. I currently prefer the term continuum of differentiation because we don't really have a scale that you can step on and figure out what it is. It'd be great if we had it. Next one. So this is going to be about the development of a self, all part of the triangle. The theory postulates two opposing basic life forces. One is a built-in life growth force toward individuality and the differentiation of a separate self. What I like about this quote is that it anchors it firmly, life forces, and I don't think there's any other field except physics that deals with forces in the way Bowen theory does. It includes forces. There is a researcher we're going to have at the BTA sponsored meeting in October coming up, Marta Bertoloso from Italy. And she is describing life forces. I forget if that's the same word she's using, a different kind of way of describing it, but same basic idea, the need to think in terms of forces. And the other, again, is the equally intense emotional closeness force. So one of my favorite, I got a lot of favorite quotes here. Brain scans show synchrony between the brains of the mother and child. But what they can't show is the internal bond that belongs to neither alone. A fusion, her term, in which the self feels so permeable, it doesn't matter whose body is whose. And this was a quote in the New York Times Book Review some years ago. The Brain on Love, Diane Ackerman. Beautifully said. Next one. The neural alchemy continues throughout life as we mature and form relationships, dabble in affairs, succumb to romantic love, choose a soulmate. The body remembers how that oneness with mother felt and longs for its equivalent. I think that's just a very powerful insight on her part, which is consistent, of course, with Bowen theory. Next one. And Bowen called these the infantile yearnings. Next one. And these are some of my favorites. And this is what he spelled out: the goals and wishes, infantile yearnings, like the schizophrenic adult child member of an extremely unresolved symbiotic attachment, to be taken care of, nursed, freedom from responsibility, have adequate, all-loving, all-giving, non-demanding figure always at your side. Now, Jack Butler put this in his book, The Origins of Family Psychotherapy, published by Aronson a number of years ago now, 2013. But those, I think, keeping those yearnings, because they're part of all of us. And anyway, we'll go with the next slide. So symbiosis is a normal state in the early mother-infant relationship. Again, that was in The Best of Family Therapy, a quote by the man himself. Next one. I think this was also a very important, pithy statement that made by Paul MacLean. The triad, what he called the triad of family behaviors in mammalian evolution that make us mammals unique. Dogs, foxes, people, whatever, gorillas. Next one. Nursing in conjunction with maternal care, and audio-vocal communication for maintaining maternal offspring contact, like the infant frets, the mother responds, and of course, play behavior, which I'm not sure if that's unique to the mammals, but he seemed to think that was, and I don't know enough about it to judge it. I don't know if there's other behaviors, play behaviors in other species. Next one, please. Now, to quote E.O. Wilson, the recently deceased E.O. Wilson, the key to the sociobiology of mammals is milk. And I took the liberty of putting that little milk stain on Wilson's face. I hope he'll forgive me, but, and then of course, below you see gorillas with the infant at the breast for looking for milk. So the key to the sociobiology of mammals is milk. Because young animals depend on their mothers during a substantial part of their early development, the mother offspring group is the universal nuclear unit of mammalian societies. Even so-called solitary species, which display no social behavior beyond courtship and maternal care, are characterized by elaborate and relatively prolonged interactions between mother and offspring. Who doubts that mothers are important and the mother's position in a family in relationship to others? From this single conservative feature flow the main general features of the more advanced societies, including such otherwise diverse assemblages as the prides of lions and the troops of the chimpanzee. Next one. Another favorite quote of mine, V.S. Ramachandran in his book, The Telltale Brain. We came out limp and squalling and utterly dependent on round-the-clock care and supervision. We mature glacially and do not approach anything resembling adult competence for many, many years. Obviously, we must gain some very large advantage from this costly, not to mention risky upfront investment by the parents. And we do. It's called culture. Next one. So just briefly again, processes governing the development of the self. On the left, showing from birth to late adolescence. And in the middle there, the father in the background, the mother in the foreground, and the young infant in the between them, showing her dotted line, which means not much development of a self at this point in time. And so that's influenced by genetics, how that happens. We don't understand how much genetics is involved in the development of self. Naturally occurring behaviors that are deeply embedded in the animal, even from birth, and intrauterine effects all have an impact on the development of a self at that point in time. Next one. So parents must separate from the child as well as the child from the parents. And we all know how important and difficult that can be for many parents, particularly when the symbiotic attachment is very interdependent. So as the person matures, siblings, other family members, and other people have an impact on their development of a self, and also cultural influences that in late adolescence, more social network outside the family, and all those have some kind of influence on the development of a self. Next one. So then there are the processes altering the development of a self. The parents there I show with a square and a circle, and the developing child in the middle. I show the parents' emotional boundaries as rather porous, and they're going to be raising this kid and who's going to inherit some of that. So family anxiety can co-opt a natural process such that it functions to meet the need of the family unit rather than the needs of the child. And this is where impairments come in. Next one, please. So it's not about parental under-involvement, as Freud and Bowlby argued, but about parental over-involvement. Next one, please. Under-involvement is almost always symptomatic of over-involvement. There are a few exceptions like that where the people had no choice but to be separated by some set of circumstances. So in that over-involvement, next one, it makes the relationship very vulnerable to more emotional distance moving into it to deal with what I said earlier about the allergy to too much closeness, balancing out the need for closeness. Next one, please. So there's imagined fears that become a reality. Next one, please. So acute anxiety generated by real threats, chronic anxiety generated by the more imagined threats that drive the distancing processes. Dr. Bowen quoted that in one of his interview tapes we did years ago. Next one, please. So parents and child separate less successfully from each other in this scenario. Next one. So if I put on the left there, the overly involved child, on the right, the freer sibling. So in preschool, the overly involved child can become easily bored and looks to mother for direction. The freer sibling finds things to do. In elementary school, feels excluded by peers. He's more reactive, even at this point, to what the others think of him, etc. Learning depending on the teacher's interest. Like if the teacher takes a great interest in the youngster, he may perform much better scholastically than a more normal teacher-student situation. Whereas the freer sibling is relationships are less of an issue, and he or she can learn from almost any teacher. So there's the idea that family anxiety can co-opt a natural process such that it functions to meet the need of the family unit, not the child. So it's not about parental under-involvement, but about parental over-involvement. Under-involvement is almost always symptomatic of over-involvement. So this can be a stable triangle up to a point. But at the bottom there, it represents the child developing not even as much self as the parents have. Next one, please. So the process can be chaotic or conflicted or seemingly orderly and harmonious. Next one. The important part is the intensity of the emotional process, intensity of the fusion. That seems to be the biggest impact on altering the physiology, feeling system, everything in the child who develops less self. And that all occurs in a triangle. Always three people at least involved. So in adolescence, the one who's overly involved is prone to either rebel or to comply excessively. Next one. And the freer child, sibling, is neither a rebel nor overly compliant. Next slide. But with the adult transition into adult life, that the overly involved child may stumble badly, such as a psychotic break or a flare-up of some kind of physical illness or a lot of acting out. Whereas the freer sibling, the separation from the family unit is smoother. So the more involved versus freer siblings as adults. Next one. So the more involved one has a poorly resolved emotional attachment to parents. The freer sibling has a well-resolved emotional attachment to parents. Never complete, but well-resolved. Next one, please. The more involved can feel quite insecure in adult relationships, seeking reassurance constantly. Whereas the freer sibling is more secure in the adult relationships, rendering he or she less reactive to the goings-on in the relationship system. The more involved child finds a mate with an equally unresolved attachment. How do we prove that? Everybody knows this is a choke point I think, because it's very easy to think your spouse is less than differentiated or more differentiated than you. And this suggests it's equal. I firmly believe Bowen got it right. And as adults, though, with the freer sibling able to sustain a close relationship. Next one. The more involved one has poorly defined life goals. The freer one, well-defined life goals. And the more involved one is vulnerable to clinical problems, physical, emotional, or social. Could say physical, mental, or social, probably a better way to say it. And the freer SIB can be experience remarkably few clinical problems. And the more involved one is the one most prone to cut off from family. And the less involved is much more able to maintain viable contact with family. Now, talking a little bit about emotional programming. A quote from Darwin: "Even when we are alone, how often do we think with pain and pleasure of what others think of us, or their imagined approbation or disapprobation? And all this follows from sympathy, a fundamental element of the social instincts." And this was a quote from Murray Bowen, who said, "Mike, if a schizophrenic patient sits down in front of you for an interview, what is he thinking? What are his questions? What do you think of me? Do you accept me? What do you want me to do?" And of course, a person very low on the scale is highly vulnerable to having their life guided heavily by those ideas, those descriptions. So you get my four horsemen of the apocalypse are the sensitivity to attention, not enough, maybe too much, approval, disapproval, expectations met, unmet of oneself and others, and distress. These, I believe, are a very short way of talking about the kind of reactivity that can generate chronic anxiety. But at the other end of the spectrum, the symbols there mean that the emotional fusion of that triangle is less, and attention, approval, expectations, and distress are managed far better. Less reaction to the lack of approval, for example. And of course, that's on a continuum. Next one. And so at the left-hand side, difficulty distinguishing fact from feeling, difficulty reflecting, ill-defined principles, values, and beliefs, poor self-regulation in emotional situations. And on the right, distinguishes thought and fact from feeling. Precious little of that in this world today, right now. Reflects well-defined principles, values, beliefs, good self-regulation, even in highly anxious times. So that everyone is, of course, caught up in this attention, approval, expectations, distress thing, but some more reactive than others. So this turns attachment theory on its ear. Next one. So the securely attached child would be the one who has got the most resolved emotional attachment. And next. And the insecurely attached child is the one caught in the most fusion. And that's a reversal of the way Bowlby and Ainsworth and company talked about it. So then that can be denied or acknowledged. Next one. So just to think about what are the key triangles to understand and learn from. So down at the bottom there with the two parents and then the two kids, the son and the daughter, that's one parental triangle. Next one. And then there's the parental triangle with the mother and the two siblings. Next one. Then there's the one with the father and the two siblings. Next one. And then looking back at the family of origin, the parents and the sister, older sister, and next slide, the triangle between the older sister, younger sister, and mother, and next one. And then the father, same idea there. And on the father's side of the family, this nuclear family, he has the parental triangle with his parents and has the situation with his mother and sister and with the father and sister. So I think I emphasize this just because I think this highlights how important triangles are into Bowen theory. Interestingly, I don't think I made a slide on this. At the old Family Center above the Xerox building or whatever it was called, Bowen walked into the audiovisual room we had there. And I think there was a tape going on. And he said, Mike, I always kind of thought of triangles as something important for family therapy. But he said they are incredibly important to theory. And I think of that as what glues a lot of these ideas together. Of course, they're all interlocking as we know. Next one, please. So again, the emotional programming for attention, approval, expectations, and distress. Next one. And the emotional programming for coping mechanisms to deal with that play out and are learned in the parental triangle, but also contributed to by the other triangles in the system. Next one. A Bowen quote: "It is a clinical fact that the original two-person tension system will resolve itself automatically when contained within a three-person system, one of whom remains emotionally detached." Such a simple, straightforward idea and so difficult to pull off. To be in close contact with a tension system between two, but yet outside of it. Next one. So just two quick examples from my nuclear family. That's me. Next. And that's the triangle between me, my wife, who you know, and our second child, a daughter. So I woke up to this triangle when this daughter was 15, and that was in 1986. I had been studying Bowen theory for over 15 years at that point, and I hadn't seen what was right in front of my eyes, a triangle. Next one, please. There was tension between his mother, my wife, and this second daughter, frequent periods of tension. And my wife had expressed the idea that this is adolescent rebellion. That's what this is all about. And I had traditionally, more than I realized at the time, handled my fusion with her with emotional distance. And therein lie a big part of the problem. And I could get very critical of her for the way she was dealing with our daughter. Next one. So I could, with my second child, I could fluctuate between sympathy for her fate, but also angry at her for some of her behaviors. Next one, please. I assumed that I was differentiated, still did at that point. Next one, not, as they like to say these days. Next slide. This is a family problem. And I engaged my wife without the attitude of wanting to distance from her, working at reducing that and not blaming her for what was going on, and to see both sides of the reciprocity, and then assume they could work it out if I would get out of the way. My side taking and reactivity was killing her effectiveness. Next one, please. So that was the first step in more open communication. And I don't know how it was that I could see that all of a sudden after 15 years. I thank the kids for presenting the challenge. And I'm just going to turn something off. I should have put it in the drawer. Sorry about that. iPhone, the ubiquitous iPhone. Anyway, so that permitted less tension when I got out of her way, my wife's way, less tension between and more openness and better definition between the two of them. And I did have the assumption they could work it out, and that was big. And I didn't have to meddle in it at all, or blame or distance. So it's a triangle. It's the triangle. It's not the dyad. The triangle, not the dyad. M. Kerr, I'm emphasizing here, was a slow learner. It's a humbling experience to see that you're part of the problem, but of course, extraordinarily valuable for finding ways to act differently. But it ain't over till the fat lady sings. And this will be the next challenge we had with our son. So I did not wake up to this triangle until my son was 15. That's 1994. I'm now the director of the Bowen Center for the Study of the Family. What's going on here? And so he was developing obvious dysfunctional behaviors and other kinds of ideas and symptoms. Next one slide. Next one, please. Acting out behaviors, and he actually dropped out of school in the 11th grade. So here's one of my kids dropping out of school in the 11th grade, and I'm supposed to be the director of the Bowen Center for the Study of the Family. So again, I found myself being critical of my wife, testy, but not necessarily overtly conflictual, and seeing the tense interaction between her and my son. And my way of trying to deal with my son was different. So I was a child-focused father in that sense. I was choosing him to be, the victim of an overly critical, bossy mother, overly controlling and anxious. I felt sorry for him and sympathetic. I felt sorry for and sympathetic with our son. I did not wake up to this triangle until my son was 15 in 1994. So that relationship was tense and conflictual. Next one, please. I persuaded her to go along with my plan of giving our son space and time to sort things out and just stay calm. He'll get through it. Next one, please. But when staying calm is not enough, it's just not a non-anxious presence. It's a lot of action that takes place here. So the situation got gradually worse over the next 6 months, and he had no plan for restructuring his life. Kathy's position, I have been bossy, yes, but also I have treated him like a prince, way too permissive. And that was an important, very important insight for her. And I could see at that point that she was right. But it didn't dawn on me until that period of time that she was right about that. The permissiveness was the getting our son into a lot of trouble. Next slide, please. So she took an I position based on that, not treating him like a prince and being far less permissive. Next slide, please. She had more realistic expectations of him, such as working or going back to school. Very calm, not intimidated by him and his threats. Next one, please. There's a fierce pushback, of course, as there always is. Next slide. And my anxiety was huge and about him. And next slide. But now I'm thinking, so I oppose Kathy. This is not differentiation of self, Bowen theory. I'm even more sympathetic with my son. Next one, please. I don't realize that I am totally neutralizing any effectiveness on her part yet again until she takes the high position with me. Why don't you two guys just live here and I'll move out? You guys got to take care of each other. Well, that woke me up. It took that to wake me up. Next one, please. So I began to see this aspect of my relationship with my son. Next slide. So I suddenly recognized that I am part of the problem. It's the triangle, stupid. So my son now appeals to me to intervene with his mother, tell her she can't do this, which is something I was vulnerable to in the past. Next one, please. My I position with our son, no, I am not going to do that. Boy, was he angry. Next one, please. He was furious with me at first, accuses me of siding with his mother. He leaves the house for about 2 days, slashing the car tires as he departs. This was pretty intense stuff. Without the triangle, he is calmer when he returns. He and his mother work out an agreement about the terms of his return. And that worked out very well for him. Next slide, please. Much more to the story over the next few years, but he graduates from college about 5 years later. He lives in Florida currently and still does, and has a good job in the financial sector. And a lot of crap was averted. I think that may be the last slide. Oh, yeah, I was at a conference doing a presentation about this subject. And a man in the audience said, "What was your son so angry about?" And I said, the anger was not in my son, it was in the triangle. The difficulty each member of the triangle has being a self is what generates the anger. It doesn't generate just from just my son. It's not a property of the individual. And this for me was, which I learned this from the experience in my own nuclear family I just mentioned, but it left the man in the audience asking the question, what's he so angry about? A little bit dumbfounded. To be able to see the anger in him as symptomatic of the way the triangle was operating was incredibly useful for me to be able to stick to my guns. Okay, that is the last slide. How do we do on time? Well, we still got 35 minutes. Good. So I'd like to hear any thoughts and questions, maybe ones I can answer and also ones I can't answer from you folks.
People would go ahead and turn on their audio and their video. And if you could type into the chat room, if you want to make a comment or ask a question, please. There's somebody in there.
Oh, sound. There's Judy Porter at the bottom.
Want to go ahead, Judy Porter?
Oh, sure. I just want to thank you for that personal example. I've not heard that before, even though I've been, attending your presentations, conferences for years, but it just made it so clear that the triangle dynamics and the discussion on the triangles and the intellectual understanding of the triangles. So that personal example just made a lot of sense. And thank you for sharing that.
Well, you're most welcome, and I thank you for saying that was a useful thing, because it definitely was useful to me, and I'm glad it's useful to somebody else.
Michael King?
Okay, Michael King, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Kerr. When you look back now, knowing what you know, do you believe you could see something about these triangles before 15 years? Do you believe that there are things that you should have seen or could have seen before those times? If that makes sense.
Well, certainly it makes sense. And Murray Bowen used to lament, why does it take so long? I think that's an unanswerable question. What is it that blocks the ability to think systems and have a conceptual framework to guide you in the kind of things I was describing? Could I have seen that earlier? Of course, if I was something or other brighter, but it depended on the outbreak of a symptom in both cases to get my thinking, I think, more mature. I remember finishing an appointment about 5 or 6 o'clock and driving home, and I'd been seeing 2 parents who were coming in about their son. And the father was describing his handling of the situation. And on the way home, I said, I'm doing the same thing he is. And that was a very useful insight. And to really kind of get me going, that I didn't add that before, but that is the question. I think one of the obstacles I think is important is that it's one thing to kind of come to understand the situation, but it's another thing to have the confidence in your viewpoint that can lead to constructive action. This is an idea I've had recently, kind of that it's not just seeing, it's having the determination to see it through and take it on in a constructive way. So yeah, that's. I wish I had seen it sooner.
Could you give a few examples of some of the things that if you would have had that clarity that you would have seen earlier in those developing intense triangles?
Yeah, I don't really know what the answer to that is, because as I said, it took a symptom, meaning my daughter's rebellion and then my son's rebellion, to wake me up to there's something wrong here. we got a regressive process going on. And when, before all that, I just didn't see it. But the fuel was obviously moving things in that direction, but I didn't see it. I was just, I don't know how, I'd have to think about that more, why I didn't see it. But I didn't. And thank God I was well enough into theory at that point, 15 some plus years out, that that I could use it when I needed to.
Well, I guess there are worse things than slash tires, you know.
Right, slash people for one.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for your question.
There's nobody else in the queue right now. Does somebody have a question or a comment? Amy
Okay,
Post.
Dr. Kerr, I was thinking a little bit about the idea that the inside position in a period of calm is preferable and is maintained in part by the exclusion of the outsider. But I was also kind of playing in my head and maybe tipping my cards at how immature I am. But I would always kind of rather be on the outside to observe the two insiders. And to me, it's actually useful to have two people loving on each other on the inside so I can get a little free. How do you know which comes first, the chicken or the egg, in terms of which position is initiated out of comfort or maintaining that homeostasis?
I thought the chicken came first. Thought we'd solve that question. Just
That
kidding.
helps, thank you.
No, right, chicken or the egg. I lost track of the point of your question again.
It might even be as which comes first, togetherness or individuality on the evolutionary arc, because would that then set up how the triangle is oriented for the preference spot?
Okay. I hear you. Don't know how to respond to that.
Randy Frost.
Hello, Randy.
Hello. Unfortunately, I had an internet disruption halfway through your talk. So I'm going to just ask a general question. And that would be that triangles can have multiple groups amalgamated on each point of the triangle. And that's sort of what you get when you have nations interacting with one another. You have a leader of a nation interacting with other leaders of nations. And presumably the triangle functions very similarly, even though large numbers of people may be grouped on one point of the triangle. So here's a speculative question. If Bowen theory became so well-known and studied that it informed the presidents, prime ministers, secretaries of state, would it be possible to forestall some of the problems we've had with wars, and most recent one, of course, being Ukraine? But I mean, you can see Russia sort of coddling up to China prior to launching the war in Ukraine. And the US is sort of on the outside temporarily of that triangle. There's a whole lot more complexity to it than that. But in principle, would there be any reason that we couldn't, as a species, do better at managing group relations, including the relations among nations, if leaders could try to be operating according to principles of Bowen theory.
Yeah, I forget who it was. He was a man who got interested in the Family Center, and back when I was still there, and he was new to Bowen theory, and he said that this is incredible what you folks are trying to do here. And he said, you know, we could end all wars with this. And that's, well, I don't know. I mean, I do think, and this is kind of a loose interpretation maybe, but what the Western world is doing with this Ukraine thing is a pretty solid I position, not trying to change Putin, but change the way they relate to Putin, and devil take the hindmost, I guess. But I don't know. I'm over my, out of my depth in trying to think, could Bowen theory be useful if the president of the United States really understood it? Could it be more useful in his actions? It couldn't only, it can't hurt, but it could maybe help. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that was the one thought. I think I expressed that to you earlier in the week, that just could think of it as a pretty solid I position. And then you see the triangles lining up in the Congress. Well, he's not doing enough. He's not going fast enough. I thought was step back, give the guy a little room. He's got to work his way through this using his own best judgment. As if this other person, I won't mention his name, but that he knew the answer and needed to enlighten Biden. Political crap that got thrown into it, I think. I don't know. Do you want to say? I guess you think maybe it could be, right?
I'm sorry?
Are you thinking that maybe it could be useful on the?
Yeah, I do. I agree with you, and had a similar thought about Biden taking an I position, actively working to engage at least European leaders, NATO, and reaching a pretty kind of united front, as it were. But again, you know, he announced to Putin in advance of the invasion what his posture was going to be. So Putin had a choice, knowing what the consequences were likely to be. He made a decision, and now it's not working out too well from his side of things. But I agree, it was an I position in the sense that, you know, he recognized he couldn't change Putin, but he could define what his posture was going to be, and eventually NATO's posture. And that may yet have useful influence on the outcome. But I think there's just untapped potential here in taking even previous wars and challenges that nations get into, and doing a post hoc analysis of what steps could have been taken that weren't, that might have made a difference. So you do a kind of social analysis of triangles among nations, and differentiation and all the other variables that go with it. Anyway, it's highly speculative.
Well, I think, as you know, Murray was, I think, very receptive to that this theory could be extended to societal emotional process, as you know. And when I think about the position Joe Biden is in as president of the US, I'm just kind of overwhelmed by it. God, the pressure on this man, make decisions that are not too much and not too weak. Anyway, it's I think overall the only I would say that Murray, the societal emotional process, is something that could be handled by theory, and how much any one individual could then do with that, or small group of individuals, I don't know. But thanks for your question.
I managed to skip over Michael Toft. Sorry.
Michael Toft, my wife.
No worries, Kathleen. Thank you. Dr. Kerr, I wanted to get back to the Rudyard Kipling poem that you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, We and They. And it was sparked by Amy's comments about individuality and togetherness. You know, I'm wondering, do you think that we is analogous to togetherness and they is analogous to individuality in the sense of identifying an outsider, somebody different? And if we think about individuality and togetherness this way, we and they, is individuality context dependent? Is what makes me an individual in my family makes me part of the togetherness in another context? Like, part of my individuality is that I trained in martial arts. I think this makes me an individual in my family. But when I go and train in martial arts, I feel like I'm part of the togetherness there. Is that the right way to think about individuality and togetherness? Or is individuality neutral and context independent? Like, is individuality the capacity to remain a distinct entity wherever you are, to stay functionally differentiated?
Well, certainly that it's well known that people can function in a work system far better than they can function in their own family system. And that very much context dependent there, which I think that's because the intensity of a work system is usually much less, but not always. I was thinking what Marta Bartoloso, who's going to be our guest speaker in October, she chose, there are two, I think she called them forces that interact. One is a force for differentiation, and the other is a force for stability. And I was intrigued by that now differentiation in the biological world is not the same, of course, as differentiation in Bowen theory, but that counterbalancing back and forth between what the individual parts of the whole are doing, and then that could be disruptive without forces that maintain the stability of it. Well, that's not a very clear idea, but I think it's the best I can do. And it's an interesting way to think about it.
Thanks for your thoughts.
Okay. I don't know how useful that was, but thanks for your question.
Dave Galloway.
Okay, David. Back out there in the Pacific. I marvel jumping around the world like this.
You're doing great with a jet lag. So this is, so my question is this, I'm gonna build it up a little bit. If triangle's purpose is to help me buffer my anxiety, and I think we would believe that if I go to a third person, triangle them in, as it were, but that third person has no interaction with anybody other than me, does that actually still count as a triangle? Because then would a pet or a substance or an activity that buffers my anxiety act as a third non-connected point, as it were? Or is there something about all three points being connected that really is the core to the triangle process?
Well, I have to think about that. One way to think about that would be what you're describing is just tension between two, and emotional distance develops, and one of the two gets involved with another person, but that other person really isn't connected at all to the one that the person is kind of distancing from. It would be hard, I guess, to call that a triangle because I'd probably think of that more as just emotional distancing into another relationship, like somebody having an affair or something like that.
Right.
I don't know if that really could encompass the triangle concept or not. I'm not sure. I'd have to think a lot more about that. What do you think?
Well, now that you just mentioned that, it's kind of interesting because then that instead of the pet or the substance being a point on the triangle, that third person is actually just like a pet or a substance to just help me emotionally distance. So yeah, I think that's where I go with that.
Yeah, the movie Scent of a Woman, many of you may have seen that. Where I think, did Al Pacino play that part?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what was I going to say about that? Oh, I had an idea. I was going to spring off that, but I just forgot what it was.
But
Sorry.
was it around distancing? Did he do something, get involved with something as a distancing?
Oh,
move?
yeah, it was alcohol. He called Jack Daniels John Daniels. And somebody said, no, it's not John Daniels, it's Jack. He said, "We've known Jack as long as I have. You can call him John."
Fair enough. And then if I may do a follow-up question, at a societal level, would you believe that if all of as many people as possible in the United States tried to have open connections with as many people as possible in China and Russia, that opening up of the connections in that triangle would be useful?
My first thought about that for sure, because like that we and they thing is based on there's no interaction between these two groups. So the other group is not one of us, they're they, and we're we, and we're cozy where we are.
I just think it's an interesting idea in terms of what individuals could do, kind of following theory that just, the principle of just having more open communication can help make the system more adaptable and that kind of thing. So just my thought.
Yeah, no, I think that would be a positive thing if that could happen. I guess we have programs based on that over the years that the government organizes to send people out to other places and let them interact directly with people in Africa or China or wherever.
Yeah.
And the good things that can come out of that, but how much of that is just a blip on the radar and the total process, I don't know, but anyway.
Thank you. Yeah.
Kathy Kerr.
Well, I was just going to say in response to Dave's example, as I understand theory of triangles, it's about living systems. And so the components are living, not say a drug or a religious belief or whatever. But, it's intriguing. Suppose you are the person in the affair and you discover that your affair is married. Then at that point, it should be patently obvious that you're part of a triangle. But, it's not always that clear. It's not always that known. But yeah, if the person who's the affair thought of themselves as part of a triangle, what would they do? They might behave a little differently than what they're doing.
Yeah, again, I have to think about that. It just seems like, let's say the husband emotionally distances into an affair and the wife doesn't even know about it. maybe some suspicion, but it's hard to call that a triangle and hard not to call that a triangle.
Actually, a thought I just had was, does a triangle really happen when person B is trying to get person C to do for them what they should do for themselves? Right. And so it's that component of person B wants C to go at A instead of B going at A. So I'll play with that thought. Thank you.
Okay.
Lois Walker?
Okay, Lois.
Actually, I noticed that Kathy Rackow had her hand up. That's what I was
Oh, okay.
commenting on.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Catherine.
All right, I wanted to say that was a very clear presentation. I don't know what it is about being 15 in your family, but also I wondered about sometimes when people lose an important person in their life, a significant person in their life. I was thinking you were in a very different place when this occurred with your daughter than with your son. Bowen was dead at that time. I've heard people say it was sobering when my father died or my mentor died, and I knew I was absolutely on my own. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. But the other, what I was thinking about is, once you've worked through something, you talked about it with your daughter, you talked about it with your son, how do you know when something is resolved? And I would say, in my experience, once you've learned something, you know it. And if the prompts come up again, you get it clearer, you get it faster. So it's not that you wouldn't be in a situation similar, but you catch on a lot faster. So I don't know really what the vulnerabilities are, the triggers are that you're subject to, but I think you catch on a lot faster and they don't go to into this major relationship tangle as you described. So those were just comments I had about your presentation.
Okay. Yeah, I think with my son and my first daughter and then the son, I mean, I should have had more knowledge, ideally, of what was happening with the triangle between me and Kathy and my son by virtue of the earlier experience. But I didn't. Ideally, I would have been able to use that information and see more quickly what was going on. Now, maybe having done it once before with my daughter was helpful. I guess that's what you're suggesting it might be. So one to think about.
It's a little time left and no one in the queue. If anybody wants to put in a question or a comment.
Allison has her hand up.
Oh,
I'd like to thank you. Thanks, Dr. Kerr. So interesting. I was intrigued by the slide that suggested this. Brain scans show synchrony between the brains of mother and child, but what they can't show is the internal bond that belongs. Blah, blah, blah. And then the neural alchemy continues throughout life as we mature and form friendships, dabble in affairs, etc., etc. So as an adoptive mother to a young 10-year-old, I wonder if you have any thoughts or wisdom that you could share with me regarding the possibility that there is an invisible third point on the fourth point maybe on the triangle between myself, my husband, and my adoptive daughter. So what I'm asking is, do you have anything to say about the bond that exists between someone who has lost contact with a primary caregiver, but whose primary caregiver has not died? Just looking for wisdom here.
This island I live on is too small for that much wisdom. No, we adopted our third child, and I think all that played out with him during those developmental years was about us and him and that triangle, because he never really was in any way involved with his mother. Yours was 10. Yeah. I don't know quite how to think about that. I mean,
It is something that fascinates me. I mean, we adopted our daughter when she was 6, but she'd been living with us since 2. And I am just intrigued by the notion that there could be a third point on a triangle that we don't actually see. I don't know.
yeah, our son could get the information of who his biological mother was, but he never had the motivation to do that. He showed no interest in that. Would that be useful to him to do? I don't know.
Mhm.
But so you've had your daughter since age 2, and then 6 you adopted, and
Mhm.
how's she doing?
Very well in many ways. And yeah, better and better as I become more of a self, of course.
Okay, can't ask for more than that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I remember my cousin adopted 3 kids at once. And I forget how old the kids were. Maybe they were all 7 or very close in age. And they came with a reputation that a certain one of those 3 is a problem. And they had that from the history of where these kids had come from before. But my cousin didn't focus on that particular child at all. It seemed to work very well between her and that child, but it was another child that she got worried about, and who was the one who was acting out more. So I don't have a whole lot of experience with that, but that was the way it played out in her family, that the pressure was off the kid, and the kid actually functioned much better with her than he was functioning at previous placements wherever they were. I'm getting this signal from my beloved, also my master technician. So I'll thank you for all in your attendance. Hope it was useful. And Kathy Kerr will do the last 2 webcasts. So I will see you when I see you.